Right. Good afternoon, everyone. I think we can get started. We have a good number of people already. So welcome to this webinar on women's land rights. Thanks a lot for joining us. My name is Chilombo. We've had over the last couple of weeks webinars on community forest management, private wildlife estates as well. We took a short break and now we're back to tackle one of the most interesting topics on access to land and tenure security, in my opinion. So today we have 4 presentations focusing on different aspects of women's land rights. But just to remind us as we get started, that you're all automatically muted, but please go ahead and introduce yourselves in the chat box and also just to interact there. You can customize your view to focus on either the presentation or the presenter. And also, as the presentations are going on, feel free to post your questions in the Q&A tab so that the presenters can attend to them. We will have a Q&A session at the end of all the presentations, but the presenters will also be able to directly reply to your questions in the Q&A tab. So feel free, and we look forward to a very interactive session. I will hand you over to today's facilitator, Patricia. Hey, Patricia.
Hi, Chilombo, and hi, everyone. I'm Patricia Malasha, the Gender and Social Inclusion Advisor for Zambia from USAID Integrated Land and Resource Governance Program. I'll be moderating this afternoon session, and thank you for joining us. And I believe we're going to have an interesting discussion and interaction the next 2 hours. We have a lineup of presentations, and that will kick off our discussion this afternoon. And I'll be introducing our first presenter in the short while. But for now, I just want to mention that we have ample time at the end of the presentations for all of us to engage and discuss. So we're really looking forward to you to share your views, your perspectives on issues, and just to hear your thoughts. And that's why we're here. We want to hear your thoughts. So I want to encourage all of you to really actively participate. So we're going to take the next hour or so, just hearing from our presenters. So please listen in and type your questions and introduce yourself in the chat box. So our first presenter is Nalucha Ziba from ActionAid. She's the country director, and she brings to the discussion wealth of experience as a woman leader and development actor, but she's also a seasoned feminist and human rights activist with strong, very strong links with civil society movement in Zambia, the government, the media, the UN agencies, and other partners. She joins us this afternoon to speak about the status of women regarding land rights in Zambia, both on state land as well as customary land. So Nalucha, you're welcome to take the floor and start the discussion.
Thank you very much, Patricia. Thank you very much, Patricia. My name is Nalucha, earlier introduced Patricia. My presentation will focus on land rights and what is the status for women in Zambia on customary and state land. Women's access to land rights is a gender issue, and it's a human rights issue. It is a vital component to achieving equality and providing resources for women. According to the FAO, fewer than 15% of women worldwide are landowners. For instance, in Kasempa, working in partnership with Solwezi Land Alliance, ActionAid has continued providing sensitization to traditional leaders and communities on the need to titles and ownership documentation. This has yielded 100% community support from both the traditional leaders as well as their subjects. As we have seen the chief coming on board, and they have been very supportive, and they have demonstrated actions aimed at supporting women to acquire land in their chiefdoms. ActionAid, also in partnership with Solwezi Land Alliance, has developed application forms and supported traditional leaders with certificates that is given to the subjects upon being awarded land. And with this, we have seen the creation of site plans, as well as 40 sites have been completed, awaiting certificates awarding ceremony. And also in partnership with Petauke Land Alliance, we have embarked on sensitization on the importance of women and land ownership and encouraged joint ownership of land between husband and wife. And this has yielded a rising number of subjects acquiring land documentation, especially women. All land in Zambia is visited in the president, who holds it in perpetuity for and on behalf of the Zambian people. This is according to the Land Act, as well as our Republican Constitution, the Land Act of 1995. The land policy in Zambia recognizes 30% and 50% acquisition of land. However, most local authorities advertise and target 30% to be given to women when they're advertising for land. However, very few audits are undertaken afterwards to try and see how much actual land is allocated to women. We've recently seen adverts from Kafue Municipal Council, and just recently, 2 days ago, I believe the Chongo Municipal Council has also just closed their adverts, but we'll see how many women get to go on and be awarded. Despite these progressive policies, very few women apply for land, failing to meet the 30%, and in instances where they are given land, they still fail to either pay, develop, or end up selling up the land. And also just the processes of acquiring the same pieces of land. I'll give an example, the recent advert which was being run by Chongwe City Council. For you to, before you even access the application form, you needed to deposit a payment in a certain bank, and they were only accepting that those payments should be made, the deposit should be made in a particular branch in Chongwe. And there were extensive long queues in most of those, and when we surveyed it as ActionAid. So these are some of the factors that women access. So you find that you have to trade off spending long hours in the queues versus trading so that you're able to get something at the end of the day. So the challenges that women face with statutory land is the complex legal procedures, the lack of transparent systems, failure to meet monetary obligations. And when we're saying transparent systems, you find that a council will know that the land that they are able to give out, let's say, is 1,000 plots of land, but their application process will be wideless and limitless in terms of who makes the application, other than securing a particular number of people who can compete on a particular slot of land. So at the end of the day, the processes have become more of fundraising ventures for local authorities as opposed to bringing about empowerment. However, progress has been made to ensure that the procedures under statutory tenure are available equally to both men and women, and to title to property is conclusive evidence of ownership of land. Some of the challenges that women face with customary land are due to reliance of customary land on chiefs and traditional leaders. Customary law takes precedence in the handling of customary land in Zambia. The nature of Zambian customs in most realms are male-dominated and tied to patriarchal norms. For instance, access to land for most women is through relationship to males in their family, either through marriage or blood relations. And customary land does not give security to women, in that women cannot get loans or use the land as collateral in order for them to meet their most pressing needs. Over the years, some traditional leaders have been seen making steady acceptance and progress in allocating land to women. Unfortunately, this is unpredictable and not assured, as it depends on traditional leaders' goodwill. That does not fully make women claim for it, considering that Zambia has many chiefs who make their own decisions. And also we have witnessed that in areas or districts rather where there are projects being implemented by various non-state actors which have to do with land, we have seen that traditional leaders are more enlightened in terms of allowing women to own traditional land. As a result of this, priority is given to males because it is thought that women may not hold on to the assets for life due to marriage. For women that are fortunate to gain access to land, the challenge becomes the control of land in terms of determining the crops that can be grown for agricultural purposes and to further their economic position. Further, as ActionAid Zambia, through its initiatives in rural areas, we have sensitized traditional leaders and women in communities on the importance of joint land ownership and women land ownership, as well as documentation for land security for land tenure. Generally, it is easier for women in rural areas to access land traditional structures as compared to statutory land, and women accessing statutory land in urban areas. Therefore, as I end my presentation, I would give 4 recommendations that can be looked at. The land policy in Zambia is a key milestone in supporting women access to land, which is highly recommended. However, we need to strengthen it with policies that empower women to flexible access to resources. The land policy should have an implementation framework that will provide for clauses that specify a payment plan, as well as development plan for women that is reasonable, longer, and different from that of what we usually see given to every citizen, especially men, as we see that from our research and undertaking economic empowerment programs, we see that women in our country are more vulnerable and economically they're not doing well. And more efforts need to ensure that women, traditional leaders, and indeed men are sensitized on the importance of joint land ownership and women land ownership, as well as documentation for land as security for land tenure. This sensitization should also be included to women themselves, as sometimes there's also self-discrimination by women who feel that they cannot take part in land ownership schemes that are being rolled out. They do not qualify. So there's always that self-discrimination without even fully understanding. So currently, even when the land policy in Zambia recognizes the importance of women land ownership, has been put in deliberate effort measures, land still belongs to the rich and the powerful, and not the poor that include women. So really, land in Zambia is about connections and who you know, and at the end of the day, the size of your pocket. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nalucha, for that short but well-packaged presentation. She's highlighted a number of issues there, tedious processes, very difficult for women, lack of information, lack of transparency, and she's also spoken to the land depending on the goodwill of the traditional leaders, who are many, and not everyone has a goodwill. So a lot of ideas, a lot of issues there for us to discuss later. So for now, we move on to our next presenter, and this time we want to look at how can we actually bridge the gender gap that exists in our country. And for our next presentation, we have Dimona Piri, who is a lawyer by profession and a rights activist, specialized in research, socio-economic justice, legal and policy analysis, and land rights. She's involved with the National Land Titling Program, which is being implemented by government, providing legal and socio-economic advice to the program on women and land titling. So she brings to us, she shares with us this afternoon her perspectives on how as a nation we can bridge the gender gap in land ownership and tenure of security. So Dimona, you have the floor. Please feel free to go ahead and make your presentation.
All right, thank you, Patricia. So my presentation is the gender gap in land ownership and tenure security. So before we get started, I think what's important for us to note is that it's important that the gap is actually breached. And why do we say so? Because women's land rights promotion, I think globally, there's this increasing understanding that in the event that we promote women's land rights, we actually get to see social development as well as economic growth within our societies. And also, it's very important in the aspect of rights as well. Generally, our women in the different societies have actually faced quite a number of disadvantages in terms of accessing land, owning land, or just controlling land. And even just other bundle of rights that get to exist alongside land rights. There's just generally that importance for us to continue to promote women's rights. And I think this is something that globally has also been recognized. And evidence also shows and confirms the fact that once women's land rights have been promoted, their social course as well as their economic status within society changes. And this is mainly for themselves, but also generally for their own families as well. So as I get started with this presentation, I think one key aspect that we need to note, we're talking about women's land rights, and issues that surround women's land rights definitely are also surrounding law. And in a post-colonial setting such as Zambia, we constantly have to ask ourselves the question of what is the legal status, for instance, of land as a form of property. We're talking about women's ownership and tenure security. Under statutory law as well as, or statutory tenure as well as customary tenure, what is the status of, or the legal status of land? What is the legal status of land in terms of ownership, in terms of ownership, in terms of possession? I think that that's a very important conversation that I think we should also be having based on the practicality on the ground. Then we also see quite a lot that for women, their relationship to land in terms of the law is often characterized by limited access, constrained control, as well as generally insecure tenure, which has led to them not enjoying legal protection of their land rights. We also have our pieces of legislation, of course, outside the Constitution, which talks about or has a provision of non-discrimination against one sex. But alongside, we also have our customary laws or practices which actually get to discriminate against somebody's sex in terms of owning land. Women cannot be allocated individually, for instance, pieces of land. They have to have access to those pieces of land through their spouse or other family members. I think that we've seen in quite a number of communities. It's a cultural practice. So we see that in terms of enjoyment, women actually get to struggle there. Then also in terms of bridging the gap, quite all right, we can come up with interventions that get to bridge the gender gap in terms of women's land rights. But beyond ownership, we can ensure that women actually own pieces of land, have interventions that encourage this. But one thing that we also have to be alive to is the fact that beyond ownership, there can also be another challenge. And the challenge may be for the women to actually enjoy their rights to ownership. So those are some of the issues that we constantly have to consider, even in interventions that I'll be talking about in my next slide as we try to bridge the gap. Then with the Sustainable Development Goals, of course, of the 2030 agenda, there's this recognition as well that there's need to have interventions and scale up interventions that actually get to ensure that women have secure land tenure and women actually get to own property as well. So do women have or enjoy the right to ownership? So ownership is a comprehensive real right or a comprehensive relationship that one has with the land. And this comprehensive relationship definitely gets to have entitlements. It has entitlements, but these entitlements are not absolute, I should say. So meaning they have quite a number of limitations. The limitations that are usually posed when it comes to ownership of land that we've seen in our pieces of legislation, for instance, I'll give an example of the Waters Act. You cannot, quite all right, you want to enjoy your piece of land, you have that ownership and all those entitlements. But when it comes to actually getting or diverting water onto your piece of land, you need to ask for permission, you need to get approval. And our Waters Act actually specifies that. So meaning already there's a limitation on the way you are going to probably enjoy your land rights. We also have the aspect of vestment of land in the president. I think that Nalucha also mentioned earlier. The aspect of vestment of the president definitely also ignites the fact that there's no absolute enjoyment of the rights to ownership. Same with the custodianship of customary land by the chiefs. In the event that you decide to actually leave a chiefdom, practice has shown us, or our customary norms have actually shown us, that a chief can actually locate land to another person if you leave that chiefdom. So all those are, I think, some form of limitations that are actually surrounding our tenure systems in Zambia, both statutory as well as customary tenure system. Then when it comes to acquisition, of course, land acquisition under statutory law is mainly through purchase, where somebody gives it to you as a gift, or it's been leased, or resettlement in instances where there was displacement, you've been resettled, and this can be through formal as well as informal structures. Most of the times with these processes of acquisition under statutory tenure, I think Nalucha mentioned this in her presentation, the challenges that women are constantly facing, as well as regards accessing, for instance, if it's the local authorities get to advertise land, that there is land for sale, there is the first come, first served basis that has been practiced quite a lot, and this has proved that it's not very practical, beneficial towards women. And I think that's why we have those 30% land allocation towards women. And also just generally in terms of communication, the communication mechanisms that are often used, you find, do not get to reach, women do not get to get the information of land that's actually on sale. And for them to have access, you'll find that this is in newspaper adverts and sometimes posters at the councils. And most of the times you find women are not the ones who get to read papers or even see adverts at places like the councils, because they'll be elsewhere. And there's need for information or communication to actually be tailor-made to ensure that women get to access property. And then also individual ownership under customary law is very foreign. Pre-colonial, I think land was mainly owned communally and not necessarily individually, but then we see that quite a lot, we see this happening quite a lot nowadays, even just within Lusaka, in the nearby areas, Chief Mongole's area, quite a number of people have gone there to purchase land individually. And also in Chongwe, we see quite a number of people purchasing land under customary land tenure individually. But initially it was quite very foreign. And in terms of inheritance, we see that women actually get to own land through inheritance, either through the spouse or through other family members. This is the main method of acquisition when it comes to land ownership for women. Then what are the factors that actually get to affect women's land rights? We see inadequacies in our laws, we see inadequacies in our policies, as well as just the aspect of enforcement. And when we talk about inadequacies in our laws, we have our Lands Act, which is like the main piece of legislation as regards land. There's several others, but it's also very key. Our Lands Act is obviously gender blind, gender insensitive. It does not take into consideration the different conditions that actually get to affect women as well as men in terms of land access control as well as ownership. We also have, for instance, the Urban and Regional Planning Act. For a very long time as well, it's been very gender blind, and also planning in our country has also been quite very gender blind traditionally. And why is this important? Because I think it's important that there's gender integration even within planning as well as urban development, because women and men definitely experience our cities very differently, and there's need to consider that fact. And women are the prime beneficiaries as well of urban development. They are the ones who actually get to remain in the communities most of the times, if it's drawing water, looking after their children, just taking care of other household chores, as well as accessing markets within their communities. We find that men sometimes leave a house early in the morning, goes to work, and comes back after when the day is over, but the woman will be there within the community doing all kinds of things. And it's important that they are also considered, and that planning is actually very gender sensitive. We know there's also quite a number of social as well as cultural issues that surround especially women's land rights. And I also talk about another piece of legislation, which is the Inheritance Act. The Inheritance Act has also proved to be a little bit gender biased. For instance, there is a provision within the Inheritance Act which actually stipulates that the surviving spouse has a life interest, for instance, to a house or a property in the until, with the condition, until they at the point where they remarry. If they do not marry, they'll stay on that property. Most of the times, you'll find that the women are the ones who are often disadvantaged, because this provision is also seen to have had a man in mind, because men most of the times are the ones who are actual owners of property. So in the event that the woman gets to remarry, then they lose that property. So we see some of those provisions which, interpreted practically, have actually proved to be a challenge towards women. Same with polygamous marriages, same with our Inheritance Act, there is that aspect which gets to disadvantage a woman. Then their ability to access justice. Most of the times, there are so many different factors that get to disturb women's access to justice. Some of them, of course, is under customary land tenures, geographical issues, but there's also structural issues. There's also the processes and procedures. So, for instance, with the systematic land titling program that I also talk about, you'll find that, and also other certification programs that have been carried out, you find that most of the times they try to ensure that the service is actually taken to a nearest place where a woman can actually have access, and there's messaging that gets to encourage them to actually report cases so that they can be resolved. Then there's definitely gaps in knowledge and information. If you ask certain women, just even a question of, can you unpack land rights? What are land rights? What do they mean to you? I think most of the times in our conversations, we found that women fail to actually mention even just what the land rights are. We talk about land rights, but what exactly do they mean? What entitlements do they invoke? And I think it's been noted that this information sometimes may be missing. Then how do we bridge the gender gap in interventions? We've got these interventions listed here. We've got the systematic, for instance, land titling program that's happening within the country at the moment. Then there's also certification programs that are happening under customary land tenure as well. The systematic land titling is under statutory tenure. And we also have certain other reforms, agrarian reforms, which are related to land, the aspect of the legal and policy reforms, human rights. We also have some behavior change interventions. So how do we ensure that we bridge the gender gap in these interventions? I'll talk generally about some, and some I'll be very specific. So in bridging the gap, it's important that even as before we begin with these interventions, as institutions we prepare, and we need to prepare very well. Firstly, of course, it's looking at, do we have any gender people within the institution? Do we have any gender specialists, people that can constantly remind us of the gender aspect, constantly engage us in the gender conversations, even as we plan in these interventions? And there's obviously need to have a gender integration strategy within our programs. There's need to have systems, of course, our M&E systems that get to actually consider gender within them, and design strategies that capture information as well in that light. as well. And we need to develop partnerships with stakeholders that are like-minded or are working within the gender sector. Then our information as well as content in terms of engaging stakeholders is need to ensure that our stakeholders are also on the same level of our thinking, and there's need to constantly have some form of training, some form of discussions with our stakeholders as regard this. Then as we prepare to do our work, there's often need, for instance, if it's the systematic titling program or the certification process under customary land tenure, conducting gender analysis kind of work to understand the gender dimensions before you even go in and start doing your work. Do a specific profile of a community. What are the gender dimensions that exist there? What are the issues there? In terms of sensitization as well, developed content that is definitely specific, or material that is specific to addressing specific gender issues, whether they are cultural, they are social, you know, they are legal, or any other factors. We constantly have to ensure that. And the use of gender sensitive language, I think this is very key as well. With some of these, like the systematic land titling program, as well as certification process under customary land, where there's enumeration, the process of enumeration also needs to have the gender integration aspect considered throughout. And it's obviously providing, for instance, additional gender information, especially as they go door to door in these households, as they capture information in these communities, and using communication channels that are better to reach women. And of course, constantly with using the gender sensitive language throughout. There is verification process and adjudication process under the titling program and certification program. Adjudication mainly resolving the disputes. How do we get to ensure that women are included at the point when we resolve disputes? Women are bringing forth their disputes. Women are actually accessing the adjudication adjudication that is being provided. And I think this is very key. There is need, of course, to constantly sensitize, constantly have messages that are going around in the communities, and also just follow-ups by the key players on those same specific issues. With verification processes, there's definitely need to ensure that in terms of maps, in terms of venues where the verifications are done, they're accessible by women, they're near where women are often found. And when to the point where we get to issue our title deeds and offer letters, it's also the aspect of how do we ensure that women go to the centers and are not linked, for instance, or do not stand in queues with men, but then we end up having different queues for women, for men, as well as persons with disabilities, and probably the pregnant and the elderly. So just that consideration, I think, is very important. And now the recording, of course, of information as regards specific recording of women issues, women-related information separately from that of men, and just general M&E as well. Then with the agrarian reforms related to land, we see that the challenge regarding agrarian reforms and women's land access or women's land rights is the aspect, of course, the access to land, the access to labor, capital, as well as markets. These are usually the challenges that are faced around agrarian reforms, and it's ensuring that these reforms get to have some form of gender integration within them to ensure that women access capital, access markets, as well as labor and the land, which is very important. So I will move on to my next slide. Then what are the benefits of bridging the gender gap for secure land tenure? Of course, the benefits of bridging the gender gap is increased women's ability to invest in land. We see that women get to invest in land a bit more, and also the improvement of individual and families' well-being and unity. We also see an enhancement in women's status in society and participation. This can be a bit more empowering as well, and enhancement in bargaining and decision-making power. Most of the times women have shunned away from making decisions, and also just having that bargaining power to air out their views, but then we see this happening, and also it also enables less vulnerability to domestic violence and property grabbing. Women have been very vulnerable to this, and there's creation of investment incentives, and it also serves as a hedge in the event of widowhood and divorce, and the ability to enforce rights when under threat. I think these are the very key benefits of bridging the gender gap that have been proven and have been confirmed in the event that we do integrate gender within our interventions or within our reforms. Then what are some of my recommendations? There's definitely need to improve interventions that address tenure security and ownership. We still have quite a lot of work to do, and there's so much that can be done, and there's need to obviously understand the value of women in documenting land. Yes, we are promoting women's land rights, but do we understand the value that a woman has even in the aspect of documenting land? The aspect of exploring conditions of inclusion as well in governance bodies that improve outcomes. There's need to really do this also in the government institutions. For instance, if it's the Ministry of Lands, what would be better to do in terms of, for instance, having a gender specialist within the ministry? Would that help in advancing certain specific interventions? So what are the different, I think, aspects that can actually be deliberately be done to ensure that we actually promote women's land rights, even within the governance bodies? And there's also the aspect of improving sustainability of these interventions. Yes, we can have good interventions, we can have the gender integration, but how do we sustain them to ensure that for a longer period of time, women get to actually enjoy their land rights? Then there's also the aspect of improved interventions on how to support social norm change. I think this is also very, very important within our societies. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dimona. Thanks for that detailed discussion in your presentation. And she brings out quite a lot of issues. I'm expecting our Q&A to be full by now, because I think she's really highlighted a number of opportunities as well as challenges that we have in our efforts to bridge the gap. We will be moving on to discuss a bit more around the newly launched land policy and what is in it for women's rights. So before I do that, just to remind everyone again, if you have just joined us, that today we're just focusing on discussing women's land rights and the opportunities and the challenges that we have as a nation, as Zambia. But next week, we're coming back again with another session, and don't miss this one, because for this particular session, we're just going to focus on the experience and the practical of what is already on the ground, what is happening and what it is yielding. So I want to encourage you, if you've just joined, that next week again, we're going to have another session to speak more around experience. So I move on now to introduce our next presenter, who is Sharon Chuni. Sharon Chuni from the Ministry of Lands and Natural Resources. From the Ministry of Lands and Natural Resources. She's the Chief Lands Officer working in the Office of the Commissioner for Lands. She's been with the ministry for over 18 years, and she has a lot to share. But for today, she's with us to highlight from the newly launched National Land Policy the opportunities for women land rights. Sharon, are you there? The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much. I hope you can hear me.
Yes, Sharon, we can hear you loud and clear.
Okay, let me at least show my face. So I am Sharon Chuni. I am based at Ministry of Lands headquarters, and I'm currently working under the Office of Commissioner of Lands. And I'm currently operating as a Chief Lands Officer in terms of assessing applications for land and any other added duties that are added to that. Into my presentation, I'll probably remove the video. Patricia, is it Patricia? Patricia, I can't see my presentation.
Okay, can you share your presentation? Or Chilombo, can you do that?
Okay.
Yeah, I've just shared it.
Okay. I've been with the ministry for some time now. Sometimes you're so shocked how the years fly. And my main focus has been predominantly just been in the lands department, but I have moved from headquarters to the region. I've worked in the region and then I'm back again at headquarters. So my presentation today is limited to the policy that we implemented, which was done in May 2021. This is a document that has been undergoing a lot of review, and it has finally been put on the table as a national land policy. Now, the document is about 32 pages. It was very difficult to reduce it into a smaller document, which anybody can read and anybody can understand. We try to make it as simple, and as I think key focus was the issue of the national land. How do we handle land as a resource? So the new policy, where are the entry points for implementation of women's rights? That's the question we have today. In the current situation is that government, through the Ministry of Lands, has formulated the National Lands Policy, which was done in May 2021 this year, whose implementation focuses on administration and management of land resource. The expected outcome of this policy is that we should have an effective and efficient system in the way land is managed and the way land is administered than the current, enhancing the current way in which things are done. So the policy itself, okay, the policy itself, I will not go into detail because it's there are some things that people need to read. The policy itself is divided into about 6 chapters. Yes, about 5 chapters. And these chapters, as you can see, the first one is the introduction. We have the situation analysis as it is existing right now. What is the vision, the rationale, and the guiding principles in regard to this policy? We have the objectives and the measures, and then we have the implementation. Now, just a highlight from the previous presenters. The current situation is that land, for example, under Chapter 2, there's been an increasing demand for land, particularly serviced land. And this land is located either in the statutory areas or the customary areas. And the processes that are involved in land allocation in these 2 areas is quite different, but at the end of the day, the documentation is obtained through the Ministry of Lands. And then secondly, just under the current situation is that land allocation is done both to Zambians and non-Zambians. That is the current situation. We do not discriminate to say if it is a Zambian or a non-Zambian, as long as you qualify based on the conditions that are provided in the Lands Act, you will be given land. The age for giving land right now is 21, and that is the current law. Apart from that, land is registered. Whichever land you're going to obtain and you'd like to convert it to statutory tenure, land has to be registered. That is the situation as it lies now. And the registration process is done either through Lusaka or through the Ndola office. We have attempted to make ad hoc arrangements where you can initiate the process through our trauma offices, you can initiate the process through Chipata office with an ad hoc arrangement, but you cannot fully process the titles in those areas. The title processing is only done in Lusaka, and it's only done in the Copper Belt, which is under our Ndola regional office. In terms of land disputes, currently the ministry has what it calls the Lands Tribunal. Now, this is a child who was born out of the Lands Act, so it was an ad hoc court, but right now there's a tribunal set up here in Lusaka where land disputes are heard, and they inquire into disputes whether it is customary or statutory tenure. And then ownership of land by Zambians. The current standing is that every Zambian is eligible to own land as long as you're 21 years and above, whether female or male. And in terms of those who are underage, in terms of children who are under 25 or 21 years, sorry, those who are under 21 years old, somebody who is above 21 has to hold that land on their behalf until they attain the age of 21. That is the current scenario. In terms of ownership of land by non-Zambians, there are various ways in which the president can alienate land, and this is provided for in section 3 of the Lands Act of Cap 184. And the president can alienate land to a bank. He can alienate land to a cooperative. They're about leave-in conditions. He can alienate land to a foreigner as long as they have a resident permit and they have the necessary qualifications. Or he can alienate land to an investor who's coming through maybe Zambia Development Agency. So that is the situation as it stands right now. So the focus that, if you see, the focus that we've had is that it's either Zambians or non-Zambians and the conditions in which they can own land. Now, in looking at the policy document, the vision that was formulated was that we would like to have a transparent land administration management system for inclusive sustainable development by the year 2035. And as you're aware, this policy is a government document, and it needed the rationale and it needed also guiding principles. So our guiding principles in the current land policy are that governance, transparency, equity, and accountability. So the guiding principles include the fact that the policy will uphold good governance and principles and practices in the land management and administration. 2, the communication is free-flowing in terms of transparency. Communication should be free-flowing. Processes and institutions and information are accessible to those concerned, and enough information is provided to understand and monitor them. And I think it's key as well that where the women's rights come in is equity. People of all status are afforded opportunity to access land. So under these guiding principles, what we have done as a ministry is that we came up with objectives and measures. And these objectives and measures, as you will read, and I'm not sure if I'll be able to share it as a soft copy, but I do know we have hard copies of the land policy, is that under the policy, we have 8 objectives. And key to us, I've just highlighted 2. I think the first one, the key in answering where the entry points for implementation of women's rights is usually the allocation of land. And that is being discussed under objective 1, which is strengthening the land allocation mechanisms in order to improve security of tenure. So just this objective has about 5 measures, which highlight the need for enhancement of land allocation system, which would translate in effective service delivery. Under this measure as well, we endeavor to ensure that we strengthen the mechanism for registration and issuance of titles. Now, what is key, I think, is objective number 8. The objective number 8, it talks about achieving a gender-sensitive and youth-friendly land sector, which is inclusive of all persons living with disabilities and other socially marginalized groups. Now, this objective alone in the policy has 7 measures, and majority of them, I would say, majority of them are on women. And it's either we're primarily focusing on women and their rights, on the fact that we should undertake non-discriminatory practices. We should endeavor to reach the 50% allocation of land towards women. We are endeavoring to ensure that the contractual age be reduced from 21 to 18 years. This I'll speak to the previous 2 presenters. As you are aware, if it's in a customary area, at 18, most likely one is a mother. They've probably got maybe even 2 children. Now, this is a scenario where you find that when the person is widowed, what happens? Is that person removed from where they've been staying in that homestead with their husband? So in answering the fact that we need to also enhance allocation of land to the youth, we're proposing that we reduce the contractual age from actually 21 to 18. And we are also endeavoring to encourage land allocation, specifically to women in the customary tenure. These measures and objectives that have been discussed above, how do they translate into activities? How do they translate into outputs and targets? What the ministry has done right now is that we have, after the approval of the policy, we undertook to set up a technical committee. The technical committee went into detail, as I've mentioned, that there are 8 policy objectives, and each one of those policy objectives has measures. So we undertook, I think that was like 5 days of discussing as a technical committee, discussing each and every measure in the policy document. So when we came to an issue, like if I highlight just the issue of contractual age, the law currently does not provide for that. The law provides that somebody has to be 21 and above. So I'm sure there are activities that I cannot preempt of what we have prepared, but it is a document that is going to be circulated. The current status is that there's a plan that has, an implementation plan has been formulated, and activities have been formulated for each and every measure. So if we're going to reduce the contractual age from 21 to 18, the lawyers will advise, but what I can highlight is that we need to review the law. We need to review the law, and we need to sit down and review all laws that pertain to issues to do with land allocation. I'll give an example of the fact that right now, it's not just the Ministry of Lands that administers and deals with land matters. There's the Ministry of Local Government. There's the issues to do with the Office of the Vice President. These offices also administer land. Not necessarily that they do the land allocation, but they do administer land. For example, in the resettlements, Ministry of Local Government right now is in the unplanned areas, which we say the statutory improvement areas. We are also talking about the fact that the Urban and Regional Planning Act also talks about planning in the customary area. So this is a national policy, and we hope that the review of the laws that pertain to land allocation and planning will enhance the way we operate right now. The implementation plan is key. It's very key. I think for us to have an outcome from this policy. And support is sought. We are currently working with our cooperating partners, but we still open our hands because there are budget lines that will need to be done for all these activities. Sensitization has to be done. So I call upon everyone who's listening to spread the word that there is a national land policy in place right now, and an implementation plan is being prepared. And God willing, by September, we should have our implementation plan and budget approved once cabinet is in place as per government procedure. So any input that you feel there are certain activities, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to share the implementation plan at this stage, but any input that is welcome, because these documents can still be reviewed. But as it is, the technical committee had a look at it. The senior management in the ministry also had a look at the document. So we should be finalizing. Approval would depend, and the budget lines that we'll do will depend on, will have to be after August election when the cabinet is in place. I think that is all that I have for today. I was told that I didn't want to go into how many women have we allocated land in this area. I know those questions will come up, but we thought with Patricia that would be done once we have this session, just giving an overview. Then we will discuss such issues maybe next week when we have a bit more, because then this document is out of the way. Patricia, thank you very much for listening. Thank you, Patricia.
Thanks. Thank you, Sharon. Thank you very much for those highlights. And as she says, come in next week again, because she'll be sharing a bit more detail around the national land policy. But for today, I think what is most important is that she has highlighted the opportunities that we all have now to engage around the new land policy. And it's up to us to see where we find fit and be part of this process. Yeah, very interesting presentation there, Sharon. Thank you very much. We are moving on now to our last presentation before we open the floor for more discussions. But let me just mention that this is interesting, not only that it's talking about more barriers or issues based on our experience on the ground, but it's also being presented by a man. At least we've listened to 3 ladies. Now it's time to listen to the man, our own gender champion and well-known rights activist, who is also the executive director for Zambia Land Alliance, Patrick Musole. He comes into the discussion with a lot of experience working around issues of land ownership, land access for women. And this afternoon is just going to share with us these issues from their experience on the ground. Patrick, our gender champion, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Patricia, for that wonderful introduction. It reminded me of a couple of years ago when I traveled to attend women's land rights a workshop outside the country. And I was told by some feminist friends there, what are you doing? This is about women. And I told them, you see, who told you that this is men against women? This is actually an issue. It's an agenda for all of us. So women's rights, or whether it's land rights or whatever rights, are for all of us. And I'm proud actually to be associated with that. So most of what I have to share, I must say, has already been covered by my 3 colleagues that have already done the presentation. And so I think I'll be summarizing and trying to, I will not go into details because a lot of detail has already been provided. So I'll begin by introducing Zambia Land Alliance. For many people who may not be aware about what Zambia Land Alliance is, it's actually a network of NGOs. We have 7 national members that make up the alliance, and then we also operate in 8 districts. Our purpose is basically to advocate for fair land policies, laws, and administrative systems that consider the interests of the poor and the marginalized. And specifically, we are passionate about women's rights. We are passionate about the youth. We are passionate about persons with disabilities, because these people's rights tend to be ignored most of the time. So we are engaged in community awareness raising around land rights, around land laws, around policies and administrative systems, because we realize that, as has already been stated by my colleagues, many people are not aware about their rights, be it land rights. They don't know what laws exist around land, whether it's customary land, statutory land. They don't know how to acquire land and so forth, and what administrative systems are in place. And so wherever we operate, we find ourselves having to sensitize communities and stakeholders around these issues. And to do this, we produce and translate information and educational materials, pamphlets, handouts, posters into, we do some of them in English and others in local languages, depending on the area where we are actually operating. As you may know, that even the laws that we have are in most cases published in English, and not everyone can read English. And so we go an extra mile of not just reading them, but also simplifying them, and we also translate them into local languages so that as many people as can read their local languages have access to this. We actually go beyond even into Braille for those that are visually impaired in terms of providing materials. So under research and land-related themes, we do that. We undertake research and on land-related themes. For example, we research around large-scale land-based investments, because the narrative usually from the government and even investors is that large-scale land investors come to bring jobs, they come to create employment and improvements and bring development and so forth. So we do research around that. Is it really true? Is what's happening on the ground? So that the information that we obtain from the ground is what informs our advocacy work. We also mainstream gender in everything that we do, in all our programming and activity implementation. For example, when we form community groups, we ensure, and in this one, we don't give it to democracy, we dictate, we ensure that whatever groups are being formed, whether it is community land advocacy communities, we must have, in a group of 10, there must be 5 women, 5 men, equal, because we feel that that is only fair. Whether it is a study circle group, we want equal representation in all those. And we've been supporting and promoting documentation of customary land by the chiefs, as has been mentioned by my colleagues that presented before me. We've been doing that in a number of districts across the country. When it comes to, I think there was a research, that a study that was done by the Law Development Commission. Unfortunately, it's a bit outdated, which shows that 82% of Zambian households depend on land for their main source of livelihood. And then that shows us that land is actually a major source of livelihoods for most of the Zambians in rural area. However, women do not enjoy the same rights as their male counterparts. The majority of rural women access land and use it, but have less ownership and control over the same land. And so as Zambia Land Alliance, when we are advocating, our focus is mostly not on access, because we know that they access the land, maybe they rent the land, or they use relatives' land, they borrow, so to speak. And so we are more concerned about ownership, because access is not such a big issue, but ownership of land and control over the land, so that they can decide what they want to grow on the land, They decide whether to transfer the land. They decide whatever they want to do with that land. That's very, very important, rather than just access. Access is not good enough, and it's not a big issue. When it comes to barriers, a lot has already been said by my colleagues. One of the major challenges that we find is lack of information and awareness. As I have already said, you would find that people don't even know that there's the Lands Act. They don't know that there's a land policy right now, which is newly launched. So because they don't know about these laws and policies, they don't know about the gender policy, they don't know there is a Gender and Equity Act and Equity and Equality Act, they are not able to demand their rights and their privileges. And so they are also not able to hold duty bearers accountable for violations. For example, they should be able to walk into a council office and find out how many women have been allocated land out of the position that were, or the plots that were advertised. They should be able to do that. But because they don't even have the information, they don't know, they are unable to hold duty bearers accountable. Then the cultural and social practices, which have already been stated, a lot of these are very, very negative. I must agree with my colleagues. You know, we have been supporting documentation of customary land in Southern Province, and one challenge that has been coming up from time to time is questioning when we give a certificate of customary land certificate to a couple, what happens? Because that land is clan land. So what happens? So does that mean that that woman who is given that, for example, if you give a joint certificate to a husband and a wife over that land, what happens when the man dies? That land is regarded as, it's actually for them, it's clan land. And so we have been accused of actually destroying their culture by introducing certificates. But we think that, okay, that's worth it if by promoting women's rights, in that sense, we are destroying that culture. That culture is negative. I think it's long overdue. It shouldn't be there in the first place. So women, in most cases, are unable to participate in decision making. You would find that men would be sitting on chairs or stools. Women would just be sitting on the mats, and they don't want to participate, especially if the husbands are there. They expect the husband to be the spokespersons to bring out their views rather than the women. And this actually works against the women because they are not able to contribute. They are not able to express themselves and demand their entitlements. It has already been said, I think in most cases, women can only access land through their male relative or spouse. Then we have the economic constraints. Acquiring land under statutory tenure is a costly affair. It involves payments of fees at different stages. Yeah, I think that's very well stated, I think, by Nalucha. These councils have, I think it's a fundraising project. They know that they don't have many, probably they don't have many plots, but they will advertise these plots and collect non-refundable fees to everyone, to so many people, and yet they don't have that much. And so from that stage, women must also pay the same fees as everybody else for collecting the fees so that they can launch in the application at every stage, survey fees and all these things. It's quite costly. So most of the women are economically challenged, and they are not able to acquire. They lack the capacity to acquire and develop statutory land. Then there's the issue of affirmative action, which in my opinion does not go far enough. For example, according to the Gender Equity and Equality Act, women were provided with 30% of allocation of all land should be provided with that. Now, I'm not sure, I think I saw a question asking how did we do, how much of land has been given to women. I don't know if we have that, but I don't have that information. The only information that I had, I think, must have been a research carried out in Kawe, which shows that only 29%. And if I'm not mistaken, that could be the highest. So we target 30% of allocation of all plots to women. And if we don't even meet the 30% and we raise the issue, the stakes from 30% to 50%, what guarantee do we have that we are going to attain this? So is the issue about the allocation, or there could be some other factors? In my opinion, there could be other factors that we need to consider, because there are issues of the amount of money that is demanded. There are issues of the time that they are given to develop and things like that, which in my opinion needed to be considered when we're doing affirmative action. Should not just end on setting benchmarks or targets of percentage allocation. We should also look into the aspects of finances that the women are expected to pay. Then the policy and legislative gaps. I think there's a poor implementation of existing laws and policies. For example, we are talking about the Gender Equity and Equality Act, which is a good one. I mean, 30% for starters is good, but has it really been implemented? Are we happy with it for us to be able to raise the stakes or the benchmarks? Shouldn't we be looking at, shouldn't we be looking at the underlying causes if we have not reached those benchmarks? We have issues like the urban planning. We have the issues, I think the Urban and Regional Planning Act, which is a very good and progressive, and it was enacted in 2015. Has it been implemented? And I think that's an issue for me. We need to look into implementation of existing one. I think most of you would be aware about the joke that is made about Zambia being very, very good at coming up with progressive policies and laws and frameworks. Other people come from other countries, they come and learn from us, they go and implement, and ours remain on paper. So I think we need to implement these progressive laws and policies that we are coming up with. Then I think the next one is laws and policies do not speak to each other. I think there are laws and policies that not speak to each other. Dimon, I think, did talk about the Inheritance Act. While it spells out what the entitlements for a wife in an event of demise of a husband is, it does not apply to group or communal assets, which means that if land is classified as communal land, that law does not speak to that land. And I think that is a problem. We need to ensure that these laws and the policies speak to each other and they are in harmony, so that the people benefit out of this. I have a few recommendations here. My first recommendation is that government and other stakeholders need to enhance awareness of laws and policies. And then this must include simplifying and translating all key documents into 7 major Zambian languages, including Braille. So ZLA has been working on this. We are already coming up, designing plans to translate land policy so that it's accessible to people in different languages, especially in the areas where we operate. It's on our table. We're working on that one. Then we also do recommend that chiefs and religious leaders should mainstream gender and women's rights in their traditions and culture. It's gratifying to know that the House of Chiefs, I think, has already begun to look at this. I think IRG has been supporting this work, so that traditional leaders through the House of Chiefs begin to look at gender mainstreaming, and this is very, very critical. And we feel that religious leaders have to do the same, because these 2 categories are the ones which tend to be don't want to be inflexible, and they want women not to be inferior and so forth. Then we would like to recommend that there should be sustainable economic empowerment of women to enable them acquire and develop their land in areas where we operate, especially in the Southern Province. After we have provided documentation, a certificate of customary land, we also facilitate some kind of economic empowerment. so that they are able to use that capacity to add value to their land. You know, people that are poor, if you secure their land, that land becomes vulnerable because they'll end up selling that land to acquire money. Because at the end of the day, they need money to pay school fees, they need money to meet other needs. And if all they have is land, no matter how secure it is, they'll end up losing it. So we would like to, our recommendation is that there is need for sustainable economic empowerment for women. So affirmative action should include discounted fees. So because we want women to acquire land, and we are even giving a high proportion, what happens to the fees? If the fees are still, if we have to pay the same fees as men, we are as well as giving land, giving them with one hand and basically telling them, get it if you can. So what we need to do as we do affirmative action, we should also consider the fees. Do women have less fees than men? We should also consider the time frame. How long should women take to develop the land? Or should we subject them to the same conditions? If we subject them to the same fees and the same time frames, then the affirmative action actually doesn't mean much to them. Then effective implementation of existing laws, including harmonizing all conflicting policies and laws. Then laws and policies should address root causes of the challenges that women actually face. So we need, before we come up with these laws and policies, we need to do an analysis to ensure that these laws and policies are speaking to the root causes and not just coming up with targets that may not be achieved because the root causes have not been addressed. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Patrick. Thank you very much. You've just added the beef to everything else that was presented earlier. And now we've reached a very good stage where everyone now is free to participate, to raise your questions, to give your perspective. And I'll be going very shortly to the Q&A box just to pick out the questions. But before I do that, is there somebody with a burning question that you'd like to ask our presenters now? Okay, I'm not seeing any hands, so I'll go straight to ask the questions, to bring out the questions. Arnold Muyunda Inyama from, well, it doesn't indicate, but asked the question, how effectively can we have women have both access and control to land? Very important. So to our presenters, please prepare to answer that one. How effectively can we make women have both access and control to land? Liz Banda, I tried to summarize Liz Banda's question here. It says, there has been a lot of positive change which has been noted in terms of traditional leaders. But how much are we investing in research to actually understand how women are benefiting from this change? Can we confidently or safely say the numbers of women are still low or they've gone up? That's a very important question. Do we actually have evidence that the change we are seeing in the traditional leaders is yielding something? Again, I'll throw that one to the presenters to pick it up. But Liz also asks another question. What are NGOs doing to advocate for land ownership for women? Are we hearing their voices? What is it that they are saying? And she also asked the question, which is which, to promote women's land ownership as individuals, or will it be more beneficial if we promoted women's land ownership, co-ownership or joint ownership with their spouses? Very good questions there. So can I ask the presenters, or whoever is ready to get one or two of those questions and respond to, then I'll proceed to other questions. Any one of the presenters willing to go? Yes, Patrick, please go ahead.
Okay, thank you so much. I think from our experience in the communities where we operate, we have left it voluntary for the families to either get joint certificates, in which case husband and wife will get a one certificate over their joint land. The challenges that come about there is what happens in the event of the one dying, especially if the husband dies. And I think that is where the challenge comes in. The certificate actually stipulates who the next of kin is. For example, it means it's land that is jointly owned by both of them. We encourage that, but we also encourage women to get land in their name. I know that from the men folk, that creates insecurity. Men are more comfortable when their wife wants to get a joint land because, okay, we are together. It's like some kind of surety that their marriage is still there. And when the wife wants to get land in her name, then it feels like they are preparing to divorce or to leave. And so we've been encouraging couples to get joint land jointly, but also women to get land in their own name without any intention of divorce or breaking up the marriage and so forth. So we've been encouraging both, and we've left it to the families, to the couples to discuss. And I think I must report that some couples, some husbands have allowed their wives to get land in their name, whereas others get it jointly. And I think it's at their own discretion. We cannot impose that you must get it in your name or you must get it jointly. That's up to them to agree.
Yeah. Yes, Sharon, please go ahead.
I may answer the questions by I'm looking some of the things that people are asking may be how can I say, it's difficult to answer them in isolation. But the first one is that land exists in two tenures in Zambia, and there's either customary or statutory tenure. Now, in the customary areas, the law provides that the chiefs who administer that land, and that privilege has been left to them. What Ministry of Lands educates on is issues to do with state land. We only come into customary land when one wishes to convert from customary leasehold to statutory leasehold. Now, in the statutory areas, I think there is need to inform people that, one, we are undertaking the regular titling of properties that we have planned. I'll take an example of Lusaka. When you talk about woodlands, you talk about Kablonga, these are planned areas, and their property numbers are systematically numbered and the road provisions are done. And that exercise to title areas, those areas, is a routine exercise. But what we are doing is that right now, I think this is something that Madame Demuna touched on, is the issue of systematic land titling in statutory improvement areas. What we're intending to do as a ministry is that, and what we've been doing in the past 2 to 3 years, is that we've been titling land in statutory improvement areas. And I will be confident to say that even today we are distributing offer letters in these statutory improvement areas. I think that what was touched on was the issue of fees. What you pay, we're not saying that you're not going to pay the entire fee that is required of you at the Ministry of Lands. But what we're saying is that you pay in a staggered manner because these places are already planned. I mean, if we go to Kanyama right now the road reserves may not be well defined, but we are titling these places and issuing certificates of title to the people who are already settled on these parcels of land. And that is being done in their thousands. The exercise has been rolled out to other provinces. I do remember that the Honorable Minister of Lands, then Honorable Jean Kapata, we did travel to ensure that we sensitize the people in Southern Province and in the Copper Belt and Central Province, that this exercise has been rolled out to as a national land titling exercise. So all these activities are being done on state land. So when we ask for statistics in regard to how many women or how many men own land in these areas, that is information that can be pulled out of our records and given to the people. But when it comes to customary areas, I think we need to clarify that we do not have jurisdiction, immediate jurisdiction. Even in the land policy, if you look at the chapter on implementation, it talks about the discretion that chiefs have in land allocation, and the fact that we do not interfere immediately, but we do consult them. In terms of issues to do with sensitization, I think that is one thing that came out very clearly when we were formulating our implementation plan. That is key. We need to inform people of what is existing, what we intend to do as government. That is on the table. Sensitization cannot only be done by the ministry. That is one issue that we clearly recognize. We have cooperating partners, the Zambia Land Alliance, we have NGOCC. So where need arises, these institutions will be engaged. I'm confident about that because I remember we went into detail. We cannot implement this policy on our own, but we need to bring on board everyone in order for them to understand what rights they will enjoy. Issues to do with ownership. One, as a woman, as an individual, as Sharon, I think Sharon Chuni is my married name, but there's also the issue of me being Sharon, my father's daughter. As long as I'm 21 years old, I qualify to own land as a woman. And as a couple with my husband, again, we qualify to own land as long as we're above 21. And then there's also circumstances where people form cooperatives and form groups. As long as the group is registered under Ministry of Home Affairs or cooperatives under the Cooperatives Act, and then they obtain a certificate of incorporation through the Minister of Lands, they qualify to own land anywhere in Zambia. Because sometimes groupings may think that you're only, if you register through Ministry of Lands, you're only allowed to own land in that particular area. But that qualification of the certificate of incorporation, once issued to you, either by ourselves or by PACRA, it allows you to own land anywhere as a group. And the emphasis will be the objective which you want to put the land to. And are you able to pay the fees that come with the size of land that you've requested for? So I think what is key right now is the issue of sensitization. I think people really need to get to know what their rights are. And we hope that the policy will answer to that aspect strongly. Thank you.
Thanks, Sharon. And can I just request our presenters, because we have quite a number of questions for you, if you can be brief in responding to the issues. And remember, our theme is, we're talking about women land rights, yes, but we're looking at the opportunities and the challenges. So our presenters, as you respond to the questions, please be brief so that we can discuss as many questions as possible. I pick out a question here from Inonge Sakala, very interesting question. She says, with an increase in women in leadership in the Ministry of Lands and all these institutions, what is it that they're doing more for women? Why do we still have these issues, these concerns? And she gives examples of other countries that have used affirmative action strategies of having women in positions, and in the process, they've also come up with very progressive, inclusive policies. What really is the issue for Zambia? I don't know who picked up that one. Nalucha, are you there? Is this something you are interested to speak to? But I also picked the question from Maina Malaya. that does the ministry help women acquire land? And I think that is related to another question, which is asking about what exactly are the affirmative action measures that are there in the ministry. So some of them are for directly to the ministry, but some of them I think any of the presenters can pick up. Anyone who is ready to go first.
Thank you, Patricia. And the question in terms of having so many women rising up through the ranks, and what are we doing to ensure that we overcome some of these structural challenges that women still face in terms of ownership and access to land. Having policy and laws is one thing, but the practicality of it is another. And as rightly put by one of the questions on this platform, as much as we have the 30% as provided for by the land policy in terms of women access to land, there's still a number of issues that have to be addressed. Most of these also has to do with the empowerment of women economically. As much as you can give women land, but do they have the power to have a say on what that land can be used for? As much as they are offered and they would pay, you find that by and large, when it comes to what sort of investments should be put on that land, by and large, most of them do not even make those decisions. They are made for them largely by their spouses, for those who are married, or by their family, male family relatives. So there's still a lot when it comes to also behavioral change and also sensitization in terms of women fully owning and recognizing that they also have the right and say in as much as policies and processes are there to facilitate. Then as much as land acquisition is being offered as a form of empowerment, women need to recognize that we still need to address the barriers that leads to women failing to develop those lands and eventually end up giving up those pieces of land or selling them. So as long as those economic barriers are not addressed, we'll continue speaking about issues of women's ownership and access to land for some time to come. Thank you.
Thank you. Sharon, are you able to speak to the questions directly asked for the ministry? Does the ministry actually help women to acquire land?
Currently, yes, we do. We have in the past year encouraged councils. First of all, everything that we operate on, that we do, is governed by law, and either it's governed by secular. So in endeavoring to make sure that most of these provisions are put in the legislative framework, I think you will notice that there are certain things that we endeavor to do. One is the fact that we've written to the councils and say that for every land allocation process that you are going to advertise or undertake, 30%. But right now we have the policy in place. The policy is endeavoring to raise the bar to 50%. So meaning that if the law will provide and say every land allocation that is done under statutory and in any planned area, 50% should go to women. There's also, I think the other presenter raised the issue of payment. There's no way, the law still provides that you need to pay consideration fees. And we understand that this consideration fees can be very high. Unlike in the current areas that we are going in the statutory improvement areas and under the National Titling Program, we stagger the payments. That is something that we need to explore. I cannot speak to it affirmatively, what direction the ministry will take. And as regards the issue of changing the law, as you are aware, Parliament has to be in place. The ministry has to draft, and in the drafting of various amendments to the acts, that has to be done in liaison with our cooperating partners, and Land Alliance cannot go without being consulted. So in terms of even amending the law, I think even for the other questions that are being raised in regard to about adjusting the age from 18 to 21, those are things that are being proposed, have been placed in the policy, and therefore through the implementation plan, when we undertake the review of various pieces of legislation, I'll take you, it was being highlighted to us that actually on the ministry website, which is the www.mlnr.gov.zm, you will find the land policy there. So just take time to read it, and you'll see that there are various pieces of legislation that we've listed that need to be reviewed, because it has to come into tandem with what the policy is trying to address. So these activities cannot all be done in the first year. As you are aware, there's only so much that we can do. But we endeavor to always make sure that there's effective and efficient delivery. In terms of women, it's an open door policy. You are allowed to either apply for land through the council or through the ministry itself. We will respond. If we feel that for that particular category of land is not available or cannot be accessed, we do refer to the relevant authorities. And we're working in partnership with the Office of the Vice President under resettlement. Even for the youth, I mean, an application form under resettlement is 50 kwacha. They're supposed to resettle those who are vulnerable in terms of disabled, in terms of retirees and things like that. So we are making attempts, but I think there is need to ensure that the implementation plan is undertaken, I think, in the first instance. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Sharon. Mr. Kauma raises a very interesting question. And as you respond to this, and I'll request Dimona to respond, because the question is, has staggering of the payments actually worked for women? I think you can give us some perspective from the experiences of the National Land Titling Program. And Mr. Kauma also raises the question, as a concerned citizen, how do you help the women that doesn't have resources to acquire land? If you do help, what is the process for someone to access land without the resources? Yeah, very, very interesting, but yeah, real life kind of questions. So Dimona, would you like to go first?
Yes. So yes, thank you for the question. In terms of staggering of payments, that is with the systematic land titling program under statutory tenure. Of course, we've noticed that there are some women who definitely get to have challenges, and at the moment there's a study that's actually being done to find out to what extent are the challenges being faced. For instance, generally with the community members within these areas where we are conducting the program in, but also specifically we'll also get information concerning how many men, for instance, report challenges and how many women report challenges. That study is still ongoing at the moment. Then in terms of whether there's assistance as regards payments at the moment as well, because we are waiting for that kind of information to come to the study that we're conducting in the areas where the program has already been rolled out. There isn't a position yet, but it's something that's still on the table. I may not speak specifically to that as I don't have much information at the moment. But I would just like to add on as well as regards the earlier questions concerning how effective can we have women, how effectively can we have women have both access and control to land? I think Sharon mentioned and talked quite a lot about the aspect of sensitization, but I think it's very important as well as institutions, you know, to prepare quite very well. And I think I talked about this in my presentation, one of my slides where I was mentioning the issue of how to integrate gender even in our reforms or in our interventions. the aspect of preparing as an institution so that we're able to see results, I think it all starts from there. What policies do we have? What procedures have we set in place that can actually accommodate women's or promote women's land rights? Do we have gender strategies within our institutions? Have we developed any kind of practice tools, for instance, as regards if it's gender sensitive information as it goes to the people that actually go on the ground? Then there was an earlier question as well concerning where is the gap really in terms of women's land rights? And the gap, honestly, like I was talking about in my presentation, it's not one way. We may not say, oh, it's social, it's cultural related, but one thing that we've noted is that it falls on different aspects. It's definitely there in the way we do things socially, culturally. We've recognized that there's quite a number of barriers that get to hinder women from actually owning land and ensuring that they have that tenure security. Even this systematic land titling program that I'm referring to has actually shown practically on the ground under statutory land that there's still quite a number of challenges even there, because the work is in unplanned settlement areas. So that is definitely there as well. Legally, policy-wise, quite all right, we have some policies that set certain standards, but we still have a long way to go. Like I was talking about, even with the Interstate Succession Act, for instance, which also gets to disadvantage a woman in some way. Then information gaps as well. Information, we can never overemphasize information. I think information, this has to constantly keep on going on. Processes or procedures, there are quite a number of aspects. It cannot just be a one-word answer or to specify it's just a specific factor. That's my contribution. I just wanted to mention that, Patricia.
Yeah, thank you very much, Timona. And I'll be quick to pick out some questions as well. And please, those who are in the audience and you feel you have a good answer to this question, please raise your hand and you'll get the opportunity to respond to it. The question from Joshua is, what documentation are we pushing as a nation around land ownership with traditional leaders? And I want to add to that another question that what is it that we are doing? What policy measures are we putting in place to make sure that chiefs aren't selling land anyhow? Those two questions related to the traditional leaders and land. Remember, we are discussing women land rights and the opportunities and the challenges that we face as a nation. So please, any of the presenters who is ready to respond to those two questions, and those in the audience who are ready to respond to those questions, please raise your hand. Yes, Patrick.
Thank you very much. I think in terms of the first question, the documentation that we are actually pushing for, we've been pushing for a documentation called customary land certificate or customary land holding certificate. These are documents that are issued by chiefs, which would ideally have some kind of drawing or map showing the extent of the land or dimensions of the land, and would have the details of the interest parties, who the landholder is, and who the next of kin is, and so forth. Now, this is not a title because it's on customary land. You've been pushing for this, and you've actually been lobbying that it be clearly stated in the land policy. But unfortunately, this has not come out in the land policy. So we may try again, because the land policy currently just talks about land register, which is to be issued by chiefs and the head persons. So the land document that we've actually been piloting, and we've tested it in different chiefdoms, is customary land holding certificate, which is not a title because it's on customary land. So that's a document that we've actually been piloting, and we've been advocating for it to be recognized.
Thanks, Patrick. Let me also just quickly push in another question. I think this goes to Sharon from the ministry. Sharon, there's a question here from NGOCC, and they are asking concerning the implementation plan, how consultative has the process been? And they're also asking, where can input be sent? Is it too late, or can they still be able to contribute? I've seen Bridget Mwaba there. Bridget, do you want to say something before Sharon answers the question?
Yes, good afternoon. I would like to respond to the question that Liz Banda posed, where she said, what is NGOCC doing to ensure that policies that promote land ownership for women are implemented on the ground? So I would like to come in. I'll be brief in my explanation. So as NGOCC, our vision, our overall vision is to see a society where women are empowered to fully participate in social, cultural, economic, and political development. Then also our mission is to see that we promote women's empowerment for gender equity and equality through coordinated advocacy, with linkages with government as well as local and international partners. So in that regard, NGOCC is involved both at local and national level. At national level, we are involved with chiefs. So we make sure that we sensitize the chiefs on the importance of access to women's land ownership. So when we do that, those chiefs are able to actually give chances to those women in the villages to have land. So that's at local ownership. I mean, that's at local level. So we do that through our member organizations. We have about 103 member organizations in Zambia, and we are implementing all those activities in all the 10 provinces. So that is that at local level. Then when it comes to national level, we are engaged with the Ministry of Finance in terms of the formulation of the budget analysis. So for instance, we contribute to the budget analysis of the national budget from a gender perspective. This is where we come in because as we are a gender organization, we make sure that we are women's rights are advocated for, and because the face of poverty is that of the face of the woman. So we make sure that even as we are advocating for different things in different sectors like agriculture, health sector, we make sure that women are encouraged in those aspects. So that is what I would say in terms of in response to the question that Liz Banda posed. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Bridget. Sharon, would you like to go ahead now and respond to the issue around the implementation plan?
Okay, thank you. I was looking at the questions, they're also private chats. In terms of questions as regards the implementation plan and whether there's still room for information to be brought, I think that can be brought to the attention of the Permanent Secretary, the Ministry of Lands. This is where the invitation came through. Then I'm sure the PS will be able to delegate it to the right office, which can either be the Office of Commission of Lands or the Directorate of Planning, because they are the coordinating department in terms of policy and other information that the ministry gives the public. I'm looking at a snapshot of questions. There's a question from Nkumbu about how the COVID-19 has influenced the implementation of the land policy. One thing is that despite us having a policy in place, that doesn't stop us as Office of Commission of Lands or as a ministry, stop us from working. We are still undertaking our day-to-day activities, maybe at a rotational basis, because as you're aware, Secretary to Cabinet has directed that we should allow officers to rotate to reduce the effects of the COVID-19. But the offices are open. So in the morning, when you come to the Ministry of Lands, we have a customer service center that is open every day from Monday to Friday between 8 and 12:30. Now, if anything that you bring is not, the customer service center can't answer you immediately, they'll refer you to the relevant offices, and we are operating on a day-to-day basis. And then in terms of the challenge that women have, is it possible for the ministry to work closely with the chiefs to harmonize the land application fees for rural women? That is something that we engage chiefs on. And as you're aware, there's the House of Chiefs. For us to first of all have this policy in place, there was vast consultation with the House of Chiefs. And they are the ones who represent the chiefs countrywide. So this policy was not done independent of them, but it was done with them. And there's another question that was raised. I think I saw it. I'm not sure who raised it, and was asking, is a non-Zambian entitled to buy or own land in Zambia? I can categorically say yes, because the Lands Act allows it. If you look at section 3, subsection 3, that is item A, they say that where the non-Zambian is a permanent resident in Zambia, the non-Zambian is allowed to own land in Zambia. Is he allowed to buy? He can buy, but one thing that we need to constantly remind ourselves on is the issue that was raised in the earlier presentations. Land is vested in the president on behalf of the people of Zambia. So there's a limit to every ownership. And that's where one can't say under statutory tenure that I permanently own this land. It has a period. So this office generates what we call a lease agreement. So the lease agreement can vary from 1 day to 99. So those are the conditions that under which land is existing. And then 2, I think the last one was the issue of companies and things like that. A company can only own land in Zambia if 75% of it is owned by Zambians. A non-Zambian company can own land, but first of all, it either has to have ownership of 75% ownership by Zambians, unless otherwise that company has an investment license. I think I'm trying to rush so the time does.
Yeah.
Time is not.
Thanks, Sharon. I think we can end there in terms of the general questions, but we're going to. Unfortunately, we've run out of time actually. So I'm just going to give a minute to each of the presenters just to make some closing remarks, picking up on any of the questions that have not been responded to, and just quickly responding to that. Under a minute, can we start with you, Patrick?
Okay, thank you very much, Patricia. I think I'd like to thank everybody that has participated in this, and I'd like to throw a challenge to all of us that this challenge about women's land rights is not just for women. It is not just for government, it's for all of us that are on this platform. So let's go out and each one of us do our part, sensitization, awareness raising, and influencing, especially when it comes to dealing with traditional leaders, in order for us to be able to influence some of these cultural practices and traditions that are negative to women's land rights. So this is everybody's business, and I'd like to encourage everyone to participate so that we can improve the situation for women's land rights. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Patrick. Who's going next? Nalucha, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Thanks.
For us, we view women's land rights as a key in terms of empowering women, as we know that from the land, women are able to do a lot in terms of improving their economic status. As we know that in Zambia, women play a vital role in the area of food production, making up the labor of at least close to 60% of small-scale farms. Therefore, when they have access to land, which is a productive resource, it's able to improve their economic situation and status. And they should not just have access, but they should also have control over that land in terms of what they can use it for, whether they want to use it for real estate, whether they want to use it for farming, or whether they want to use it for other things. So therefore, We urge that the non-state actors should continue with the progress that is being made in terms of engaging traditional leaders as well as the government when it comes to issues of land acquisition for women, as it remains a vital area and a key to achieving equality for women. Thank you.
Thanks, Nalucha. Dimona, your last remarks.
Okay. So my last remarks are that even in our interventions concerning women's land rights, we definitely need to ensure that we work towards more rights being in the bundle of rights, more rights being in the bundle of rights as regards land rights. And also, once we ensure that this happens, even through the different efforts that we are making, and that we need to make sure that these rights are actually protected in the event that they are threatened. And they have to be legitimate, of course, socially as well as legally. And obviously looking at the aspect of them being enjoyed long enough and to allow a return mainly for the women. So these are my closing remarks concerning our efforts to make sure that at least we constantly have this at the back of our minds. Thank you, Patricia.
Thank you very much. Sharon, do you have something to say?
Yes, thank you. Thank you so much for organizing this. I think every opportunity that is there, it's important for the ministry to come and clear some cloud, but our key focus is to effectively and efficiently administer land. And this land is not just being administered on my individual capacity as an officer, but for the citizens of Zambia. And women empowerment is cardinal. And I think that every opportunity that the ministry has been called on to be able to discuss these issues, I think we've tried to make ourselves available. And for any processes and any procedures that people would like to get clarification on, the ministry practices an open door policy. You are free to walk in and ask us and inquire. It may not be just necessarily on how to get a title deed, but it may even be on how to get an offer letter. You do not need any agent or any go in between, but we provide these services on a daily basis. We are open and we're located at Mulungushi House, opposite UTH. And the Office of Commissioner of Lands wishes to thank USAID for the support that you continue to bestow on us as a ministry. We cannot ignore that much. For this exercise that we've undertaken today, we thank you very much for this opportunity. And best of regards from my permanent secretary and the Commissioner of Lands.
Well, thank you very much. Well, the experts have spoken, and we've all spoken. We've added our views. So join us again next week when we'll be talking about women land rights and the experiences on the ground. Thank you very much for each one of you for being part of this discussion. I hope that you found it interesting and that you have learned one or two things. Chilombo, I hand over to you.
All right, thanks a lot, Patricia, and thanks everyone for your participation. So we're back again next week on Thursday at the same time, where we'll continue this discussion on women's land rights, but then we focus on the lessons learned and the way forward. So we have some interesting presentations from the Patelke District Land Alliance, NGOCC. Dimuna comes back next week to focus on the land titling program. And Patricia will also give insights on some of the projects that they've been implementing at USAID ILRG. And we also expect that Sharon will come back with much more detail, hopefully on some of the statistics and the implementation of improving women's access to land as well as tenure security. So thank you so much for your participation, and we'll see you next week.